The rifle barrel dragged in the slush, a 10-pound anchor of cold steel that felt 3 times its size in my shivering 15-year-old hands. It was April 1945, and the Reich was a starving beast. The sergeant's breath smelled of turnip mash as he shoved me toward the line, screaming for us to hold a world already lying in ruins. The Florida humidity is a thick, wet wool blanket draped over my shoulders, smelling of rot and salt water, and the sharp, acidic tang of pine needles baking in the sun. My stomach is a shriveled knot, a hard fist clenched against the memory of the watery turnip mash we swallowed like medicine back in the fatherland, and even here with the scent of the mess hall drifting on the breeze, the hunger remains a hollow, aching ghost. I look down at my hands, the knuckles still mapped with the purple scars of frostbite from the odor, and I can still feel the biting, oily grease of the K-98 rifle that was shoved into my grip. The oversized field gray wool tunic scratches at my neck, the fibers caked with the dried salt of 1,000 miles of retreat, and the grime of foxholes that became shallow graves for boys no older than myself.
Easy there, Steiner. You're staring at that perimeter fence like it's made of solid gold. Keep those legs moving before this heat cooks you right out of those boots.
The sergeant's voice is a low, gravelly rumble, lacking the jagged, glass-shard edge of the officers who screamed us toward the Russian fire, but I flinched nonetheless, my shoulders hunching toward my ears by instinct. I am 15 years old, though the reflection I saw in the camp's galvanized water trough this morning belonged to a specter, hollow-cheeked, eyes wide and rimmed with the red fatigue of the sleepless, a face where the bone seems to be trying to break through the skin. My boots, American-issued and stiff with new leather, feel alien and heavy on my feet, a sharp contrast to the cardboard-soled rags I wore when we were running through the slush of April. I remember the smell of the charcoal heaters in the bunkers, that acrid, choking smoke that we inhaled greedily because it was the only thing warmer than our own thinning blood. The dirt-caked M43 field cap sits low on my brow, the brim frayed and heavy with the moisture of the swamp air, reminding me of the weight of the steel helmet that used to give me migraines. Every breath here in Florida feels heavy, like pulling silt into my lungs. So different from the razor-thin, freezing air of the collapsing Reich, where every inhalation felt like a knife in the chest. The sergeant walks past me, his boots crunching rhythmically on the Florida sand, and for a terrifying second, the sound mimics the rhythmic snapping of frozen branches under the boots of the advancing Red Army. I can still hear the rattling of the ammunition crates, the wood splintering under the desperate prying of our fingernails as we reached for bullets that were never delivered to a front that no longer existed. My uniform hangs off my emaciated frame, a field gray shroud that makes me feel like a ghost who simply forgot to lie down in the mud of the Silo Heights. Sweat trickles down my spine, cold despite the sweltering May heat, a physical echo of the night. The sergeant in Germany shoved that 10-pound anchor of steel into my chest and told me I was a man.
Drink some water, kid. You're looking a little green around the gills, and I don't need the CO breathing down my neck because a prisoner keeled over from the sun.
I take the offered canteen, my fingers trembling as they brush against the cool, beaded metal, a sensation so foreign and luxurious that it feels like a trick of a dying mind. The water is metallic and lukewarm, but as it hits the back of my parched throat, I am suddenly back in the slush of the German spring, the taste of iron and dirty snow filling my mouth. I remember the rifle barrel dragging behind me, the cold steel catching on the frozen ruts of the road, a weight I was too weak to lift and too terrified to drop. My knees were knocking together in that oversized uniform, not just from the biting wind, but from the realization that the world was ending and I had been recruited to hold up the ceiling. The sergeant back home had teeth stained yellow by Ursid's tobacco and a heart made of flint. He didn't see a child. He saw a gap in a line that needed to be filled with meat and bone. I can still feel the vibration of the Kityusha rockets in the soles of my feet, a rhythmic thumping that felt like the heartbeat of a dying giant, shaking the very earth I was supposed to defend. Every blink of my eyes brings back the image of the splintering trees, the forest turning into toothpicks under the weight of the artillery, and the smell of cordite and wet wool that never leaves my skin.
Steiner, I said, drink. Don't drown in the damn thing. You're 1,000 miles away, son. Snap out of it.
I pull the canteen away, the water dripping onto my tunic and forming dark spots on the gray wool like fresh oil on a garage floor. I am 1,000 miles away, yet I am still in that forest, staring at a rifle that felt like a mountain, wondering how my hands were ever expected to stop the tide of history.
History's a heavy thing for a boy's shoulders, Steiner. Ease up. The war's done for you. You're standing on Florida sand now, not European mud. The sun is out, the birds are singing, and nobody is shooting. Look at me.
I look up, but his face is silhouetted against the blinding glare of the Gulf, a dark shape that reminds me of the silhouettes we were told to watch for on the horizon. My fingers reach up to the frayed collar of my tunic, the wool scratching against my throat, heavy with the salt of the Atlantic and the stale sweat of 1,000 miles. The humidity here is a thick, wet blanket, but inside, beneath the ribs that stick out like the hull of a wrecked boat, I am still shivering from the cold of the West Point.
You're thinking about the boat ride over, aren't you? I've seen that look on every kid we pulled out of the Rhine. You all think we're taking you to a hole in the ground to finish what the artillery started.
It wasn't just a boat. It was a floating iron tomb that smelled of diesel fumes, vomit, and the sour breath of 500 boys who had forgotten the taste of milk. I remember the way the steel floor vibrated against my spine, a constant, low-frequency hum that felt like the heartbeat of a monster. We were packed into the hold, stacked in hammocks that swayed with every heave of the black Atlantic. And in the dark, we whispered the things we had been told in the youth camps. We whispered that the Americans were giants who ate the hearts of their prisoners, that we were being shipped to the desert to dig our own graves, or to the mines of the north where the sun never rose.
We heard the rumors. Goebbels did a hell of a job on you kids. He had you believing we were the savages.
The darkness in that hold was different from the darkness of the forest. In the forest, the dark was full of fire and the screaming of trees. But on the ship, the dark was silent and heavy, with the weight of the water pressing against the hull. Every time the metal groaned, my heart stopped, thinking a U-boat, our own people, would send a torpedo through the steel to keep us from talking. I remember the taste of the hardtack biscuits they gave us, dry as bone and smelling of the burlap sacks they came in. I held mine like a treasure, even when the seasickness turned my stomach into a knot of acid.
I saw you boys coming off the gangplank. You looked like you were walking toward the gallows, every last one of you. Your eyes were so wide I thought they'd fall right out of your heads.
We were waiting for the blow. Every time a guard raised his hand to point the way, we flinched, expecting a rifle butt to the teeth. I remember a tall soldier, a man with skin the color of polished mahogany. A man the party told us was subhuman. A savage from the wilds of the colonies. He stood at the top of the stairs with a tray of metal cups. I froze when I reached him, my knees shaking so hard I could barely stand. I waited for him to spit on me, or to push me back down into the dark.
That would have been Corporal Miller, likely. Big guy. Had a smile that could light up a stadium.
He didn't smile at first. He just looked at me, at my hollow cheeks and the way my tunic hung off my frame like a tent over a stick. He reached out, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. Instead, I felt something warm. He had pressed a cup of cocoa into my hands. It was thick, sweet, and smelled of real chocolate. A smell I hadn't known since I was a child in Munich before the sirens became the only music we knew. I opened my eyes, and he just nodded toward the deck, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder, saying words I didn't understand, but a tone that felt like a hand steadying a falling vase.
He was telling you to keep moving before the lieutenant saw him being soft. But he wasn't being soft, Steiner. He was being a man. There's a difference.
I drank that cocoa while staring at the horizon, the first bit of light I had seen in days. The salt spray hit my face, mixing with the sweetness on my tongue. It was the most terrifying moment of my life because it was the moment the world stopped making sense. The savages were the ones giving us warmth, while the heroes who sent us to the front had left us to starve in the mud. I look at the canteen in my hand now, the Florida sun baking the wool on my back, and I realize the crossing didn't just take us across the ocean. It took us out of the lie we had been living. The air here does not behave like the air in Westphalia. It is a thick, invisible wool that wraps around my throat, forcing me to swallow the moisture before I can even breathe. As I stepped off the transport truck, my M43 field cap felt like a lead weight atop my skull. The sun was a blinding white eye in a sky so blue it looked painted, devoid of the smoke and soot that had choked the heavens over the Rhine. I adjusted the collar of my tunic, the coarse, frayed wool scratching against the heat rash blooming on my neck. Every movement felt sluggish, as if I were wading through a river of warm honey.
Move it along, Steiner. Keep those boots clicking on the gravel. We haven't got all day to stand around and melt.
I flinched at the sound of his voice, my shoulders hunching by habit. Sergeant Thompson didn't bark like the Unteroffiziers who had screamed us into the meat grinder at the front. His voice was a low, steady rumble, like the sound of a distant truck engine. I looked down at my boots, seeing the fine, pale Florida sand coating the black leather, turning them a ghostly gray. My legs felt like hollow reeds, trembling with a fatigue that went deeper than my muscles. I followed the back of the boy in front of me, watching the salt stains bloom in white rings on his field gray jacket.
Straight ahead into the long building with the screen doors. That's the mess hall. Try not to trip over your own shadow on the way in.
I reached a door, and the smell hit me, a physical blow that made my knees buckle. It wasn't the smell of a soldier's camp. There was no scent of wet earth, cordite, or the greasy tang of machine oil. Instead, it was the smell of yeast, of roasting meat, and something sweet and sharp like cinnamon. My stomach, which had been a cold, dead knot for months, suddenly gave a violent, agonizing lurch. I gripped the doorframe, my thin fingers digging into the wood. I was certain this was a hallucination brought on by the heat. The Americans were savages, we were told, barbarians who would scalp us or leave us to rot in cages. But savages did not bake bread that smelled like my grandmother's kitchen before the Lancaster bombers came.
Keep the line moving, Steiner. Don't go fainting on me now. You're almost at the trough.
I stumbled inside, the sudden shade of the mess hall falling over me like a cool cloth. The sound was a roar, the rhythmic clatter of metal against metal, and the low, constant hum of 100 men chewing. I was handed a rectangular metal tray. It was heavy, silver bright, and clean. I stared at my reflection in the polished surface. I saw a ghost with hollowed cheeks and eyes that looked too large for his head, a shivering child dressed in a dead man's uniform. I moved down the line in a trance, my wooden clogs clacking against the linoleum floor.
Give the kid an extra scoop of the mash, Henderson. He looks like a stiff breeze would snap him in two.
A man in a white apron, his forearms thick and covered in golden hair, tilted a large metal scoop over my tray. A mountain of white, fluffy potatoes fell onto the metal with a soft thud. Then came a slice of meat, dripping with a thick brown gravy that glistened under the electric lights. My hands began to shake so violently that the tray rattled. I looked at the bread. A thick, square slice of pure white bread, softer than a pillow. There were no sawdust filters here, no husks of rye to break a tooth on. It was a miracle made of flour and grace. I looked at Sergeant Thompson, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was terrified. This was the last meal. They were feeding us the way a farmer fattens a hog before the winter slaughter.
Sit down and eat, Steiner, and for God's sake, chew slowly. I don't want to be cleaning up your lunch because you bolted it like a stray dog.
I sank onto a wooden bench, the weight of the tray nearly pulling me forward. I picked up a metal fork, real silver-colored metal, not the notched tin we used in the trenches. I took a small piece of the meat, my mouth watering so much it was painful. The moment the salt and the fat touched my tongue, the world outside the mess hall vanished. There was no war, no burning cities, no screaming officers. There was only the warmth spreading through my chest. I looked at the American soldiers standing by the doors, their uniforms clean, their bellies full. They weren't looking at us with the hatred of a victor. They were looking at us with a quiet, bored indifference that was more human than anything I had felt in years. I realized then that the lie I had been told wasn't about the Americans being monsters. The lie was that we were the only ones who were civilized. I bit into the white bread, and for the first time since I was called to the Volkssturm, I felt the stinging heat of tears in my eyes. The taste of the white bread lingered on my tongue like a fading dream, a phantom of sweetness that felt entirely too heavy for my shrinking stomach. I wiped the salt from my cheeks with the back of my hand, the rough wool of my oversized sleeve scraping against my skin until it burned.
All right, Steiner, on your feet. You've had your picnic. We've got a schedule to keep and the sun isn't getting any lower.
Sergeant Thompson's voice wasn't unkind, but it carried the flat, metallic resonance of an order that could not be questioned. I stood up, my knees popping with a sound like dry twigs snapping, and I felt the weight of the M43 field cap sliding forward over my brow. I adjusted the dirt-caked brim, looking around at the 13 other boys who had been pulled from the processing line with me, all of us looking like discarded marionettes in our tattered field gray uniforms.
Move it out, fellas, into the back of the deuce and a half. Keep it orderly. One behind the other, just like the sergeant major showed you.
We shuffled toward the olive-drab truck, our boots clattering on the packed floor to earth, raising small puffs of dust that smelled of ancient pine needles and dried mud. I grabbed the edge of the tailgate, the metal burning hot under the May sun, and I hauled my emaciated frame upward with a groan that felt too old for a 15-year-old chest. The interior of the truck smelled of stale grease, diesel fumes, and the sweat of men who had been working in the humidity for far too long. I sat on the wooden bench, the slats digging into my thin thighs, and watched as the others climbed in, their faces pale masks of uncertainty under the shadow of the canvas canopy.
Stay seated, keep your hands inside the vehicle, and don't give me a reason to make this ride any longer than it has to be.
Thompson slapped the side of the truck twice, a hollow thump-thump that sounded like a coffin lid being hammered shut. And then he climbed into the cab, The engine roared to life with a violent shudder that vibrated through the floorboards, through my boots, and up into my very teeth. We began to move, the camp buildings sliding away behind the flapping rear flap of the canvas, replaced by the endless, towering green of the Florida pines. For the first hour, no one spoke. We only swayed in unison with every pothole, our shoulders bumping against one another. The heat trapped under the canvas becoming a suffocating wet blanket. I looked at the boy across from me, his eyes wide and vacant, his fingers obsessively fraying a loose thread on his tunic collar, and I knew he was thinking of the same rumor as I was. At the transit camp, the older prisoners, men who had survived the desert or the Eastern Front, had whispered about the swamp disposal, telling us the Americans didn't want the burden of feeding children. They said they would drive us deep into the Everglades, where the water turned black and the alligators waited, and simply let the wilderness erase the evidence of our existence. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was a desert again. The moisture from the bread, long gone, replaced by the metallic tang of pure, unadulterated terror. The air began to change, then shifting from the heavy, stagnant scent of the forest to something sharper, something that bit at the back of my nostrils. It was the smell of salt, deep, ancient, and cold, drifting in on a breeze that suddenly cut through the humid heat of the truck bed. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, the rhythm frantic and uneven, because I knew that smell from the stories. Salt meant the coast. Salt meant the end of the land. Salt meant the water was close, and there would be nowhere left for us to run when they forced us out of the truck. I gripped the edge of the wooden bench until my knuckles turned a ghostly white, my eyes fixed on the sliver of light at the rear of the vehicle, waiting for the moment the wheels would stop and the drowning would begin. The brakes shrieked, a piercing metallic cry that set my teeth on edge and sent a final violent shudder through the wooden bench. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine, and the distant rhythmic thrumming I couldn't yet identify, a low, pulsing roar that sounded like the earth itself was breathing. My fingers remained locked around the edge of the seat, the splinters digging into my palms, but I no longer felt the pain. I felt only the cold vacuum of terror in my stomach, the certainty that the next sound I heard would be the clicking of bolts and the sharp, barked orders of a firing squad.
End of the lines, Steiner. Everybody out. Let's go. Move those skinny legs before the sun cooks us all inside this tin can.
The heavy iron latch of the tailgate groaned, a sound like a guillotine blade being drawn back, and then the world split open in a violent explosion of white light. I winced, throwing my forearm over my eyes as the Florida sun poured into the back of the truck, its heat so sudden and intense it felt like stepping into an oven. I moved toward the light on trembling knees, my oversized field gray tunic dragging against my narrow shoulders, the wool scratching at my neck like 1,000 tiny needles. I expected to see a trench, a wall, or perhaps the dark barrels of rifles pointed at my chest. But as I hopped down from the bumper, my boots didn't hit hard-packed earth or gravel. Instead, I sank into something soft and blindingly white, a substance so fine it felt like warm sugar against the leather of my soles. I lowered my arm, blinking back tears brought on by the glare, and the breath died in my throat. Before me stretched a horizon so vast and so blue it didn't seem real. It was a liquid jewel, a shimmering expanse of turquoise and emerald that melted into a sky the color of a robin's egg. The air was thick with the scent of salt and rotting kelp, a sharp, clean tang that cut through the stale smell of diesel and sweat that had clung to my skin since we left the camp.
Well, don't just stand there catching flies with your mouths open. You ever seen the Gulf of Mexico before, Steiner? Or did they tell you the ocean was made of fire over in Berlin?
I looked at the sergeant, my wide, fearful eyes, searching his face for the trick, for the hidden cruelty I had been told to expect from the Americans. He wasn't reaching for his sidearm. He was leaning against the side of the truck, his olive drab cap pushed back to reveal a forehead slick with perspiration, fumbling a crumpled pack of Lucky Strikes from his pocket. His movements were casual, almost lazy. Devoid of the rigid, murderous discipline I had been taught was the hallmark of the savage enemy.
Strip 'em off, Steiner. The tunics, the boots, the caps, all of it. You look like a bunch of drowned rats in those rags.
My heart hammered harder now, not with the fear of death, but with the fear of the unknown, my hands hovering over the buttons of my tunic as I looked at the other boys, their hollow-cheeked faces reflecting my own bewilderment.
I said strip. That's an order. Get in the water, go swim. If you drown, it's less paperwork for me. But I reckon the salt might actually scrub some of that German dirt off your hides.
I fumbled with the frayed collar of my tunic, my fingers clumsy and weak, until the heavy wool fell away, exposing my protruding ribs and the pale, translucent skin of a boy who had spent too many months in the shadows of war. I kicked off my boots and stood on the white sand, the heat of it radiating up through my toes, a sensation so grounding and peaceful it made my head spin. I looked toward the water, where the waves tumbled over themselves in a lace of white foam, and for the first time in years the crushing weight in my chest began to lift. These men, these savages who had conquered my country, were not standing us against a wall. They were giving us the sea. I waded deeper into the surf, the salt water stinging the weeping sores on my ankles where the rough wool of my socks had chafed the skin for months. It was a sharp, clean pain, a reminder that I was still alive to feel it. The Gulf was warmer than the Baltic, a gentle liquid silk that curled around my calves and tugged at the hem of my oversized trousers. I looked down at my hands, thin and trembling, the knuckles like pale stones under the skin. My reflection in the undulating water was a ghost, a hollow-cheeked specter of a boy who had forgotten what it felt like to be clean.
I leaned against the rusted fender of the transport truck, pushing my helmet back so the breeze could dry the sweat on my forehead. I pulled a crumpled pack of Luckies from my pocket, tapped one out, and watched the kid. He looked like a scrap of laundry caught in the tide, his frame so slight that the wind seemed to blow right through him. I didn't point my carbine. I just let it hang loose on its sling, the metal warm against my hip, its weight a familiar, heavy comfort I wished I didn't have to carry.
I turned my head to look at the sergeant, expecting to see the sneer of a victor, or the cold, calculating eyes of an executioner. Back in the flickering light of the bunkers in Berlin, the posters had shown men like him, with fangs, their boots crushing the hearths of honest German families. They called them the American savages. But he wasn't looking at me with hate. He was squinting at the sun, his face lined with a wariness that matched my own, though he was twice my age. He took a long drag of his cigarette, the blue smoke swirling and then vanishing in the humid salt air.
I exhaled, the smoke tasting of toasted tobacco, and the quiet realization that the war was finally moving into the rearview mirror. I saw the way the boy looked at me, like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve, or a nightmare that had suddenly started speaking German. I reached into my webbing, pulled out a small, bright orange fruit I'd swiped from the mess hall, and tossed it toward him. It landed in the soft sand, near his bare feet with a muffled thud. "Eat up, Steiner," I said, my voice low and gravelly. You look like a stiff wind could blow you all the way back to Hamburg.
I stared at the orange. It was a vibrant, impossible color, a shade of life I hadn't seen since the rations became nothing but sawdust bread and watery turnip soup. I bent down, my knees creaking like old floorboards, and picked it up. The skin was cool and dimpled, smelling of a citrus grove I had only ever read about in schoolbooks. I began to peel it, my fingernails digging into the rind, releasing a spray of zest that stung my nostrils and made my mouth ache. With a sudden, sharp hunger that felt almost like grief,
I watched him devour it, the juice running down his chin, his eyes darting around as if he expected a phantom officer to appear and court-martial him for the crime of enjoying something. It made my gut twist. I'd seen the camps at Dachau, seen the hollowed-out cities of the Ruhr, but seeing a 15-year-old treat a piece of fruit like a holy relic was a different kind of hurt. I looked out at the horizon, where the blue of the water met the blue of the sky. A line so perfect it looked like God had drawn it with a ruler.
The sweetness of the orange was overwhelming, a burst of sugar that hit my tongue and sent a jolt through my entire body. I swallowed a segment whole, feeling the weight of it in my stomach. For years, I had been told that these men were the destroyers of culture, the barbarians at the gate. Yet, here I was, an enemy soldier who had been taught to shoot at his own shadow, and this savage was giving me the only kindness I had known since my mother kissed me goodbye at the train station. The lies of the ministry began to peel away just like the orange skin, leaving nothing but the raw, stinging truth of our shared humanity.
I kicked at a sun-bleached shell with the toe of my boot. Beautiful, ain't it? I asked, not really expecting an answer he could formulate in English. The Gulf. My pappy used to bring us down here before the world went to hell. It's the kind of place that makes you forget why you ever picked up a gun in the first place. Makes you remember you're just a person.
I didn't have the English words to tell him that I had already forgotten the feel of a rifle. I looked at my field-gray tunic lying discarded on the sand, the eagle on the breast looking small and pathetic, a plucked bird in a cage of wool. I realized then that the Reich was gone, not just in the maps and the headlines, but in the very fiber of my soul. The boy who had marched in the Hitler Youth was dead, buried under the rubble of 1,000 air raids. But the boy who loved the sea, the boy who used to build sand castles in the summer sun, that boy was still there, shivering in the Florida heat, finally coming home to himself.
I saw the change in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't terror. It was a slow dawning, like a pilot finally finding his way through a thick fog. I checked my watch, then nodded toward the deeper water. Go on, then. Get in. Just don't swim to Cuba, Steiner. I'd hate to have to come get you.
I didn't need to be told twice. I waded deeper until the water was at my waist, the cool pressure pressing against my emaciated ribs. I let out a breath I felt I had been holding since 1939. I dove forward, my head disappearing beneath the turquoise surface. The world turned silent and blue. There were no sirens here, no whistling of falling bombs, no screams of the wounded. There was only the rhythmic thrum of the tide and the salt in my throat. When I breached the surface, gasping and blinking, I looked at the shore. The sergeant was a silhouette against the blinding white sand, a guardian rather than a jailer. The long peace had finally begun, and as I floated there, I knew I was no longer a soldier. I was just a child again. I sit here now in a chair that creaks with the weight of 85 years, and I look at my hands. They are spotted like old fruit, the skin translucent and thin as parchment. but I can still feel the ghost of that Florida salt drying on my knuckles. It is a strange thing, how a single hour of mercy can outweigh 4 years of iron and ash. That is the lesson I carry into the winter of my life. That even in the darkest belly of a world gone mad, there are those who will reach out a hand simply because it is the right thing to do. That beach wasn't just a place to swim. It was the place where I was allowed to exist again. The characters, incidents, and dialogue in this video are dramatized for narrative and entertainment effect. While some events may be inspired by real-life themes, this story is a work of fiction